Greg's asked me to share with you, the title is What is Antioch School of Church Planning and Leadership Development? What I really want to share is what that means to me, how that's affected my life. Last year, I believe you're introduced to a lot of Antioch. Quick question, how many of you have done Acts through the Antioch studies? Okay. How many of you have done the first four, Acts, Pauline, Essential, and Leaders? A few. Okay, I just wanted to make sure who I was speaking to. This is something that the region's been promoting, our denomination's been working in, and Greg asked me to share some of the stories that I've shared doing some of the classes we've done together. Before we get into that, I want to share a story that will introduce what I'm trying to get at. Years ago, when my kids were young, in Vernon, I was a Sunday school teacher, and a lot of the families there were homeschooled. A lot of them encouraged me to try that, and I was pretty much against it. Typical New England response, maybe it's new, I don't like it, I'm against it. But I recognized something in my junior high class, junior boys class, that many of them were well-versed in their Bible, the homeschoolers. They could articulate it well. They put it together well. They read well. And I became aware of some of the things they had that those, including my sons, did not have. Later we moved and ended up in Windham, and my oldest son came, junior in high school, sophomore in high school, and said, "Dad, would you please homeschool me?" The pressures of the stuff he was dealing with was too much. And we said yes. We looked into it. It was actually a private school that did the homeschooling. Dom graduated a year early. He was well-grounded, and he was better prepared for meeting life. We started my daughter off doing that when she was in 6th grade, and she did all her studies homeschooling. And looking back at that, when she had her friends over and vice versa, the parents would ask, "What is different about your daughter?" I wanted to say it was her parents. In truth, she was not being taught what was in the public schools. She was being taught our values. She was taking a Bible class. Her junior and senior year, she took systematic theology. Recently, she was visiting a church, and she came home. She's 23. She's married to Ashley Zostak, some of you know. And she said, I said, "How did it go?" I said, "Dad, you wouldn't believe it. Guy took a passage of Scripture and never explained where it fit in the chapter, let alone the Bible or how it fit into the counsel of God, and took it out of context and shared some emotional things with us and never left us with a challenge." I was kind of disappointed. I'm not sure how many 23-year-olds can do that, and it's not because she was educated in a pastor's house. I'd like to take credit for that. But it's because she was homeschooled, and we taught her our values, our beliefs, the things that we thought were important. And I see that in our culture today, a lot of the kids in public schools are being taught what the liberal culture wants taught, and we've abdicated, as a people in this country, much say in what our kids are taught today. That's not what I'm here to talk about. But later I got introduced to Antioch. Before I get to that, I want to comment on some things that we know are true. We're not living in the same culture we lived in 25 years ago. Most of you here probably would not have predicted that before your life was over, we would see some of the things we are seeing today. The more I study the Word of God and study history, I think we're getting more like the time that Paul lived in, an immoral, pluralistic, worldly, liberal society without much God in it. That's important because Paul has success. Appreciate what Sean shared today, looking through Acts, looking through the Pauline epistles. Some people in my church introduced me to Antioch, and the first thing that happened was I was very much against it. In fact, Frank Jewett and Roger Brown and Mark Bickford, I've already seen Pastor Frank. Again, I apologize for giving you fits during those times as you patiently tried to share that with me. I was against it, skeptical. I thought it was another package program that was coming along. Then I attended a conference put on by Vision New England. Dr. Eddie Gibbs was speaking in Derry, New Hampshire, leading and growing a church in turbulent times. And he got up there and says to the pastors, "You were trained for a time that no longer exists." And I thought about that. I said, And he says, all of you are here looking for a 10-step program, as Sean mentioned this morning, package thing or some plan of success that will get you from here to here. And he says, I don't have it. You can see almost a sigh in the room. And he says, even if I did, by the time you got home and put it into practice, it would be out of date because our culture is changing. All of us were looking and saying, well, then what? And he says, well, I'm a professor of church growth, but I've studied church decline. And he took the first half of the conference explaining the changing things and then sent us to lunch. But he said, before he sent us to lunch, he said, you're not alone. A lot of you are waking up wondering, where do I fit in? Where does the church fit in with this new world we are living in? And as I sat down at lunch around tables much like this with pastors, one of the pastors says, man, I thought it was just me who didn't get it. And the pastor started sharing, and there was a collective sigh a second time, this time of relief. It's not just me who is struggling to find out how the church responds to a changing age where the church is no longer the center of community, but it's been marginalized and put on the side. We came back, and he shared some things. He says, you need to start with Acts, go to the Pauline epistles, and study how Paul and the early apostles work through this and how they put it together and get back to the principles that built the early church. Two things that were important, sound familiar. Prayer and the Holy Spirit. If you've taken the Acts course, those are the two right answers to most of the questions. I started doing that, found some other materials, and about that time, Superintendent Tabor made available the Acts course in 3 locations, and some of my church people said, come with us. And I came. That's where Pastor Frank put up with me, Mark Bickford among others, and I challenged everything that was said. This was new. This was different. This was not what I had been taught. This is not what I grew up in. This was not what I saw through most of my life. I grudgingly went, gave fits to the people who were there. Steve Brown used the word last year, transformational. That's what I found. I'm not here to share with you necessarily what Antioch is. I'd like to share what it meant to me, but in doing so, I want to share a couple of things that are important. First of all, the first 4 courses. If you do anything with the Antioch, I challenge you to take the first 4. Acts, keys to the establishment, expansion of the early church. Looking at what was the mission of the early church. How did it progress? How did the book of Acts unfold this, as Sean took us through this morning very quickly? How it was fleshed out in the church. Then the Pauline epistles, the strategies for establishing churches and believers. Was Paul given a strategy? Did he have one? Was it normative for us today? Can we apply it to our situations today? Third unit is essentials. Understanding the essentials of sound doctrine. How are new believers and new churches established in faith? Who needs to be taught, and what is it that is taught to them, and how important is community in this? Finally, the leaders course, leaders in the early church. One thing that's incredibly important in establishing, maintaining, and perpetuating, as well as planting new churches, is leadership, good leadership. How do we raise it up in the church? Who do we raise up? What's required? Who does those things? Antioch did a survey, and those who finish those 4 courses, I think it's better than 80%, go on to finish the track of study at Antioch. I say take those 4 because it takes those 4 to get all the pieces, the corners of the puzzle, to see what the picture is. I challenge you, if you're interested, to take those 4. I appreciate that because that introduced me to it and I stuck to it. Before we knew it, we had it going at our church, sharing with the Oxford church, groups, different people from different churches meeting together. There's also another resource called the First Principles, again mentioned earlier today. I'm trying to figure how best to describe it. It's sort of a basic version, but it covers all the stuff the college courses do, but it does it in a way you can use in Sunday school or Bible studies. It takes 6 weeks. You can use it for 13 weeks if you break it up that way. Again, I believe it's transformational. My church has been through most of them. Got about a third of my church through all the ones we've done so far. It's made a tremendous effect. We have a challenge in our church that every believer needs to be a theologian. Every believer needs to be a minister. Our church has embraced that, and this is what I want to share with you today, how it's affected my church. I have a small church. In fact, since we started Antioch, my church is smaller. It hasn't grown bigger, but it has grown deeper. Share some stories and things that Greg asked me to pass on to you. I had a young man come to our church, saved at church camp, PJ. And he was burdened for his dad. He was baptized at camp, and the first Sunday he came to church, his dad came in a suit. Bill came and he said, I'm here to support my son. I've lived a messed up life, and this is my youngest, and if he's doing this, I want to support him. He was there for his son, but PJ had his dad there because he wanted to see his dad saved. His dad was wondrously saved, and a year later was baptized the same place his son was. But you got to understand a little about his father, Bill. Bill was an alcoholic, still drinking. Bill had been through a number of relationships. Bill had had a lot of wreckage in those relationships through the years. Some of his family didn't communicate with each other. And Bill had been trying to figure out, but hadn't. He'd been to a lot of churches. At our church, we were starting the Antioch program, and we were trying to build community. One of our older ladies adopted Bill. He was 65. She was close to 80. Adopted him as her son, took him home for supper, him and PJ, and he connected with a lot of people. And I remember 3 Sundays later, 3 months later, PJ stood up in church. My dad's been sober for 3 months and hasn't had a drink. I kind of cringed, and I said, well, Bill may not be back here next week. Bill stood up and said, yes, that's the longest I've gone. Never took another drink. He came up to me about a year later and said, Pastor, we need a deacon in our church. I said, yes, we do. He says, could you train me? And I'd be happy to do it. I want to be involved. To be honest with you, my first thought was, Bill, with your past, with all that baggage you have, with your history, I know if I float your name right now, and I said this to him honestly, people are going to say, what? But I says, you don't have to have the name to do the job, the title. And I says, and I think you would be good. I said, why don't you ride with me? He was retired, and he did. He rode with me, and he kept asking me what-if questions. But I didn't realize if it wasn't what-if scenarios, these were real scenarios he was involved in. Make a long story short, he had diabetes. It affected his kidneys, and one night he fell asleep in Christ quite unexpectedly. I was dumbstruck. I didn't expect this. He was doing some great things. We had his funeral and opened it up to the church, and the church couldn't hold the people that showed up. And I spoke to his family and people. They said, we've known Bill for 60 years. Tell us about the Bill for the last 5 years. And I remembered a story. I did a wedding for some people that I knew distantly. And at it was a DJ. It was an outside wedding. He was setting up my mic. And he says, aren't you the pastor of the Highland Cliff Church? I said, yes. You know Bill? I said, oh, yes. What happened to him? I said, what do you mean? He says, he's not the same Bill. And he said, did you ask him? He said, yeah, I did, because he's gone to church. He's done that to Catholic church, Protestant churches, and for a couple of weeks he stuck with it, gave up drinking for a couple of weeks, but he's different now. I said, what did Bill say? He said, before I went to church, now I go see my family. We were working to build community, so it wasn't just an hour or 2 hour touch on the weekend, but throughout the week. And Bill ended up visiting and touching a lot of lives. There was over 200 people at that service. His family, his friends, people. He was going to college at 65. He said, I always wanted to do it, and he was tackling that. Some college students in their 20s came. We want to know what happened to this Bill. Along that same time, there was a lady who came to church who had a son named Jake, highly functioning autistic. He was in his 30s. I wondered how much of the stuff he understood. He wanted to be involved in the church, came to Sunday school. His mother was timid. He'd talk nonstop, quietly to himself. Some people might find it a disruption, but he fit into our church quite nicely. Jake wanted to do something, and we let him do the offering. And he came up and did it. And we always had good offerings when Jake took the offering. He cheerfully made everybody give. But he'd come back to his seat, and when he finished, he'd give a little kick with his feet and sit down. He came to Sunday school. We were doing first principles. And he got himself a Bible and learned how to find it. We waited. He wanted to read. Before long, he was writing with me. We were going places and doing stuff, and I was trying to teach him things. And he says, what do I have to do to be saved? I explained it to him. Didn't know if he was fully comprehending. Boy, did he ever. I baptized him. He had a horrible fear of water, especially anything that threatened to go over his head. And I said, Jake, to be baptized, I'm going to lower you. And I could see the terror in his face. And he says, I need to do this. I baptized him, his whole family there. I didn't know it at the time, but he had a photographic memory. He worked at his father's garage, large garage, mini tractor trailers. He passed away suddenly of a heart condition. You're going to hear this theme. A lot of the people I'm talking about were with us 2 to 5 years and died. And I'm getting a lot of blame for that. But Jake passed away, and his funeral was at a funeral home, and it was packed. We had the reception at the garage, and everyone came up to me, "Hi, Pastor Dave." They knew our worship leader. They knew our church. I'd never met these people. And I said, "How did you know me?" He said, "Look at Jake's door. He has on here my church family with my picture and Tom's picture he pulled off of Facebook. And he'd share my sermons with them every week, the Sunday school lessons every week, the gatherings we'd have for game night, suppers that we'd have. And he called it his church family, something we were trying to ingrain in our church. He certainly got it. I have another man, Donnie Vance. My son, when he was young, took a friend to Super Bowl rally, Word of Life. This kid was saved. The next Sunday, he shows up with his grandmother. And I said, "Wayne, that's nice you're here. You brought your grandmother. Did someone tell you?" He says, "No, but Dom told me that if you know Jesus, you bring people to hear about Christ." And so he hadn't been baptized yet. And he was bringing his grandmother, who I baptized not too long afterwards. She was saved. Well, she struggled with a very worldly husband. He was very hard, very profane, vulgar man. And she tried to get him to come to church. He was resistant. I talked to him, got to know him quite well. One day I got a call before I get there, Joanne didn't know what to do, and my wife set up a Bible study, and they got together with a lot of these women who struggled. And some of the older ladies started sharing and pouring their lives into some of these women. This lady was in her 60s. She said, "I don't know how I can put up with Donnie. He wants me to take part in the worldly things I can't do anymore." And they prayed with her and helped her. One day I got a call, and Donnie wanted me to come down to the house. He was in tears. And he says, "I want what my wife has. I don't know what it is. I don't know what to call it, but I want to know, and I want to be a part of this family." Baptized him. Started working with him. He passed away too. Living people now. Kenny Shield is at our church. Came on Easter and Christmas. We all have those people. I'd drop him a note. He'd show up, say hi, and his life fell apart. And he says, "I don't know what to do." I says, "You need a church family. Come to church." And he came, started coming to Sunday school. And he said, "That's what I've needed. I've been alone." And he connected, and he's been going through First Principles. He just came up recently, as we talked about this morning, and says, "I want to do more. What can I do?" And we found things for him to minister in community, not with an elected office, but helping people. Some of you know Pastor Jesse Stevens. My son-in-law Ashley did an internship under him. My daughter went along as well. And while they're out there, introduced Pastor Jesse to First Principles. And he said, "This is different." And he called me up and we talked. He eventually took some of the courses online that superintendent offers. And he got frustrated like I did. And I said, "Jesse, hang with it. 2 or 3 courses." By the 3rd course, he left our group and started his own group out there. And he says, "It's changed our church. We are now a family. We're trying to teach this." And he was frustrated because everyone didn't get excited as quickly. And I said, "It takes time. It's taken us about 3 to 5 years for our people to grab hold of this." But down the road, I wanted to share with you the difference in my church. It's not bigger, but it's deeper. I have people who are reading the Word of God and interpreting and sharing it with others. We've taken them through those things. I have people who are sharing and articulating the good news. It was said in the group this morning, I asked my church, if you were to articulate the good news, the gospel to somebody, what would you say? What are the parts of it? And all together, I think they put it together. And if they don't know the good news, the gospel, if they don't feel comfortable in sharing it, they aren't sharing it. So we worked on that. And people sharing the good news with their families. More than that, I found our church started connecting with each other. We have a network of phones that ladies call each other and check, especially some of the ones who struggle. Our church has been through a lot the past few years with injuries, accidents, illnesses. And when I get there, I'm finding out somebody's already ministered to the need. Somebody's already made a visit. Somebody's already stopped by. And they've stayed connected. They don't see each other just once, but they see each other multiple times during the week. I have people say, "Pastor, don't worry about seeing this person. I've got that." I never had that too much before. Sharing with me in ministry, and they're excited about what the future holds. And I'm looking, and our church is getting smaller, church is getting older, got more problems you can shake a stick at. Seems like every time God raises up one of these on fire people, they only stay with us a year or two. But I'm a partner in ministry with the people in my church. Some of you may be interested. I challenge you, investigate it. I also challenge you to try it. It requires some commitment. I say that because it will challenge some of the perceptions you have. You'll scratch your head over some things. Some things may make you angry. I'll confess to you, some of the readings I've done, I got quite upset. Some of those best discussions came out of those readings. More than that, we were with other pastors who found ourselves in the same boat, working through this, sharing our ideas, what worked, what didn't work. I challenge you, investigate it. But I also warn you, it requires commitment. It's not, Sean said this morning, a 10-step thing you can quickly jot down and go put to work. It's going to take a lot of effort. Probably take you, if you do a class, 2 classes a year, probably take you 5 years. If you don't take it for credit, just for the course, for your own knowledge, it's $80 a course. It's going to take some reading. It's going to take some discussion. It's going to take some examining of what you hold and seeing if it fits with what's being taught. Key part is the Socratic discussion. So when we get together and work and talk, and as iron sharpens iron, one person sharpens another. Some of the most challenging things I've learned, important things I've learned, has come from these discussions. A couple of our classes, we stopped right there and had prayer because God impacted us so much in that discussion. I encourage you, some of you say, well, I'm skeptical. I'm not sure about this. A new package program. I don't want to know if I want to invest that much time. It's important. I think Hummel said that anything of worth or excellence takes hard work. These are the things that are important in our church, at least my church. There's other ways you can do this, but this has been very successful. One of the biggest things I learned in all this, the importance of community. I've learned that probably one of the biggest failures in discipleship that we do in our culture today, and there's so much printed material, you wonder why we don't have deeper Christians, is because of lack of community. Having accountability, having encouragement. If you want to lose weight and try to do it by yourself, you will fail most likely. But if you join Weight Watchers, your odds go up significantly. Weight Watchers has figured out that if you want to make life change, you need to do it together as a community. The church was originally the one that was invested with that. Like Bill with his giving up drinking and becoming discipled, he didn't find a church, he found a family. We're still trying to learn community. We're not connected enough as we are. Some materials out in the foyer that you're there to look through. There's a number of people here who've taken classes. Challenge you to check it out. There are those of you who are my age and older. When I first started coming to Eastern Region, I was one of the younger pastors. Greg Moody's called me the elder statesman, I think it was now. I'm not sure I'm ready for that. But you may say, well, I'm in my 50s or older, and I'm not sure I want to invest that amount of time. One of the classes we had at my church, we had somebody in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. Pastor Heath is here. He remembers that class, I'm sure. And the question was, if you only had 10 years left in your life, what would you do? And the 20-year-old said, wow, that's a long time. The 7-year-old said, just 10? We discussed that amongst ourselves with the unique perception we had. The 7-year-old said, I want to be doing this. I want to be learning how to be an authentic Christian in an authentic church, doing the mission that God gave. Not that we're not doing it in the places we are, but sometimes what we have been doing doesn't fit in this culture now. Some of you may be feeling like those pastors at the conference I went to. We've been trained to do this, but someone's changed all the dynamics, all the conditions. And what we've been doing doesn't fit with the church-centric, borrow Sean's word, church-centric type of program we're running. Antioch isn't perfect. There's some things that I've found that I just, but the majority of it has produced some wonderful stuff. Helped us ask the right questions. You can't get to the right answer without the right questions. Challenge you, if there's more that you want to know, there's many people here who can share, but I wanted to share from my part in my church. It's been transformational. It's made a difference. One last thing with community. 18 years ago, there was a question. If your church died, closed up, would anybody in your community notice? I wondered then if that would happen. Recently, not so much. We have a gentleman who lives next door who doesn't come to church, who mows our lawns because he wants to be involved with what we do. We have a lady who helps clean our church, doesn't come to our church. Get checks in the mail from people helping some of our ministries that we're involved in. I don't know where they come from. They're in our community. I see people, and they say, "This is Pastor Dave. He's our pastor." Our church is starting to make an inroads in our community, being with them and sharing with them Jesus and ministry. I don't think if our church closed, I think if our church closed, they would know so. I pulled a moving van into my house to let off some stuff I got from my parents. And 4 or 5 people from a neighborhood, not from the church, said, "You're not moving, are you?" It makes a difference. There's other programs, other ways, but for us, this has made a difference in our church. I challenge you to check it out. It may help you learn how our church functions in a changing culture. Thank you.